She told him he wasn't the father, and he believed her. For years later, he saw a little boy with his eyes, and learned the devastating truth. Sarah Bennett had never expected her world to collapse in a matter of seconds. One moment, she was standing in the soft glow of Nicholas's penthouse kitchen, heart racing as she clutched the positive pregnancy test in her hand, and the next, she was being dragged into the cold, echoing office of his parents, the very people who had barely acknowledged her existence until now. The message was clear, cruel, and absolute: she was not welcome. The Hayes name, legacy, and bloodline were not to be diluted by someone like her. She wasn't rich, didn't come from influence, and didn't belong in their world. They offered her money first, a life of comfort in exchange for disappearing. When she refused, they smiled, slow, calculating, and threatened everything she cared about, including Nicholas's future. Sarah had no doubt they could follow through. She had seen the way Nicholas hungered for success, how he idolized his father's empire, how he had built his life brick by perfect brick around a dream they had crafted for him. If she stayed, if she told him the truth, he would be forced to choose between her and the only life he'd ever known. She didn't think he was cruel. But she wasn't sure he was strong enough to stand against them either. So when they asked her to lie, she agreed, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't bear to watch him be torn apart. When she met him the next day, her heart was already broken. Nicholas looked at her with the same warmth, the same ease, never suspecting that the woman he loved had been cornered. She told him she had something to say, and then, keeping her hands clenched and eyes fixed on the ground, she lied. "You're not the father," she said, her voice hollow. "It's someone else's. I'm sorry." He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He stood there for a long moment, pain slowly replacing confusion, and then he walked out. That was the last time she saw him. Sarah didn't cry right away. She waited until the apartment door shut, until the silence was too loud to ignore, and then the tears came, silent, endless, full of guilt. She packed up what little she owned and left the city within days, changing her number, closing her accounts, and trying to erase a chapter that still lived inside her with every heartbeat. She was 24, unemployed, and pregnant. Alone. The following months were brutal. She found a modest room to rent in a small town several hours away, picked up shifts at a diner while the morning sickness passed, and took nursing classes at night. Every dollar mattered. Every decision was survival. When her belly grew too big to hide, she wrapped it in oversized sweaters and worked until her feet throbbed. There were no baby showers, no excited calls home, no one to celebrate the first kick or ultrasound. But Sarah held her head high and whispered to her unborn son every night, promising that she would love him enough for two. And when Liam was finally born, with his blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the man she once loved, she felt her heart fracture and heal at the same time. He was perfect. He was hers. And he was also a reminder of everything she had lost. Still, Sarah never regretted the choice she made, not even once. She protected him. She gave him peace. That had to be enough. Even if it cost her everything. Life in the small town wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and for Sarah, that steadiness became her salvation. After Liam was born, the days blurred into one another, waking up before sunrise to prepare his bottle, feeding him in the pale morning light, rocking him through colic and fever, kissing his cheeks when he smiled in his sleep. She didn't have a partner to split the weight of parenthood, no family to fall back on, and certainly no time for regret. But what she lacked in help, she made up for in resolve. Every time she looked at Liam's tiny fingers or caught the way he blinked up at her with those vivid blue eyes, she remembered why she had made the choices she did. He was the reason she kept going. He was the reason she smiled even when her body begged her to lie down and stop. She worked at the local clinic part-time while finishing the last portion of her nursing certification. The clinic supervisor, a woman named Janice with a blunt voice and kind eyes, had seen the fatigue in Sarah's posture from the beginning but never questioned her about it. She just offered an extra break here and there, sometimes slipped her a hot coffee without asking. Janice wasn't warm, exactly, but she saw people, and Sarah had never forgotten that. In the evenings, after work and classes and grocery runs with a stroller that squeaked embarrassingly loud, Sarah would bathe Liam, change him into soft pajamas, and settle onto their worn but clean second-hand couch. They lived in a tiny two-room apartment above a bookstore, where the heater clanked all winter and the ceiling fan buzzed when it spun too fast. But the windows let in golden afternoon light, and the place smelled like paper and cinnamon from the bakery next door. Sarah made it feel like home. There were photographs taped to the fridge, Liam's handprints on canvas hung crookedly on the wall, and a pile of children's books by the bed they shared. At first, she thought motherhood would feel like an endless climb, one long struggle toward survival. But as Liam grew, so did her strength. He began to talk early, calling her mama before his first birthday, and learning colors by pointing at cereal boxes in the grocery aisle. He loved music, always dancing to commercials and jingles with chubby legs that barely held him upright. He had Nicholas's laugh, a low, sudden burst that caught her off guard, and it made her breath hitch every time. Sarah didn't talk about Nicholas. Not to anyone. Not even to herself. But she kept one picture hidden in a shoebox in the back of her closet, an old photo taken during a weekend trip to the coast, when she and Nicholas had been blissfully unaware of the storm looming ahead. He had his arms wrapped around her from behind, both of them smiling into the camera, sand on their jeans. She hadn't looked at the photo in years, but she couldn't throw it away. It was a memory of a life that could have been, if only things had been different. Sometimes, when Liam slept and the world was quiet, she would lie on her back and let herself feel the ache she had ignored for so long. She wondered if Nicholas ever thought about her. If he ever regretted walking away. If he believed the lies she had told him that day. She doubted it. He probably had a new life now, a polished wife, a corner office, no idea he had a son who had inherited his exact smile. One day, while walking Liam to preschool, another mother complimented her on how well-behaved her son was. Sarah smiled and thanked her, but as they walked away, the woman said something that made her freeze. "He's got your heart, and someone else's eyes." Sarah didn't reply. She just squeezed Liam's hand a little tighter and walked on. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't have the luxury of thinking far ahead. But for now, she had carved out something stable, something safe, something entirely her own. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fair. But it was hers. And though she didn't say it aloud, a part of her still carried a quiet hope, that one day, the truth would come out, not in chaos or bitterness, but in a way that allowed her son to know where he came from. Not just from her. But from the man who never got the chance to love him. Until then, she would keep building the life they deserved. Brick by quiet, stubborn brick. The air was cool and crisp the morning Nicholas Hayes arrived in the small town of Fairhill. He hadn't been there in years, not since he was a teenager visiting distant family friends for a summer retreat. Now, as a guest speaker for a regional charity initiative aimed at improving access to children's healthcare, he found himself walking streets lined with quaint shops, warm brick buildings, and sleepy sidewalks. Everything about the town felt different from the sharp, glassy skyline of New York City, slower, softer, quieter. He hadn't expected it to feel like a relief. Nicholas had changed over the last 4 years. The man who had once prided himself on composure and control now found himself carrying a subtle bitterness, a weariness that followed him even into sleep. Since the day Sarah had told him the child wasn't his, something inside him had fractured. He had buried the pain quickly, as he had been trained to do, and turned it into focus, success, expansion. He was more powerful now than ever before. More respected. And yet, more alone. Every relationship since Sarah had felt hollow, every smile practiced, every kiss empty. He never told anyone why he'd stopped dating for more than a few weeks. No one had ever come close to her. The event was held at the town library, newly renovated with donations from a dozen regional sponsors, including his own company. After the speech, a small reception took place in the adjacent park. Children ran between the benches while parents gathered under white tents with coffee and pastries. Nicholas stood near a table, politely responding to questions from local officials, when he saw something, or rather, someone, that made the entire world narrow to a pinpoint. It was a boy. About 4 years old. Blonde hair, bright blue eyes. The kind of blue that didn't come around often. The kind of blue Nicholas saw every day in the mirror. The boy was laughing as he ran toward the playground, arms out like airplane wings, crashing gently into a woman's legs. The woman bent down, brushed the boy's hair back from his face, and said something that made him laugh again. Nicholas couldn't hear it. He couldn't hear anything. Because the woman, the one who turned her face toward the sun just then, was Sarah. His heart stopped. It was her. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was a little longer, her frame a bit thinner, like life had been less forgiving than she deserved, but her presence hit him like a punch to the chest. He hadn't seen her in 4 years, hadn't heard her voice, hadn't let himself imagine what her life looked like now. And here she was. And she had a child. A child that looked exactly like him. The pieces clicked together all at once in his mind, violently, completely. His breath caught in his throat. That boy wasn't someone else's son. He was his. He had to be. Nicholas backed away from the table, barely excusing himself as he walked across the grass toward them, feet heavy and heartbeat deafening. As he approached, Sarah turned, sensing someone near. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, everything that had been buried came roaring to the surface. Surprise. Panic. Guilt. And something else. Grief. Sarah didn't speak. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes darted to Liam, then back to Nicholas. He stared at her, searching her face for some kind of explanation, but all he could manage was a single, shaken question. Is he mine? Her hands tightened around Liam's shoulders. The boy looked up curiously, sensing the tension but too young to understand it. Sarah swallowed hard. She didn't nod. She didn't deny. She just stood there, frozen, and whispered, "Nicholas, please." He looked at the boy again, then back at her. The anger that surged inside him wasn't the kind that erupted, it was deeper, colder. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You told me he wasn't mine." Tears began to gather in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't have a choice. Your parents. I believed you," he cut in. "I believed what you said and walked away because I thought I had no right to stay." Sarah crouched down beside Liam, whispering something into his ear. The boy nodded and wandered back toward the playground, glancing back once, then continuing on. She stood slowly, facing Nicholas again, the dam behind her eyes finally breaking. "They told me to disappear. That I would ruin your life. They threatened to destroy mine. I was scared, Nick. I was pregnant, alone, and they made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere near you." He didn't know what to say. The fury inside him wasn't just at her, it was at himself, at his parents, at the years that had been stolen from all 3 of them. "How old is he?" he asked quietly. 4, she replied. "His name is Liam." Nicholas closed his eyes for a second. 4 years. He had missed every first, the first word, the first step, the first time Liam had fallen and needed comforting. He had missed it all. And the boy didn't even know he existed. "I didn't know how to fix it," Sarah said softly. "I thought I was protecting you. And then it just felt too late. "It's not too late," Nicholas said, though his voice broke. "He's my son. And I want to know him." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, hesitantly, painfully. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door. A door he was ready to walk through. Sarah hadn't planned on seeing Nicholas again, not ever. That part of her life had been sealed away, buried under layers of exhaustion, survival, and the quiet resignation of someone who had made peace with pain. But after the confrontation in the park, everything that had once been closed began to reopen, and it terrified her. The way Nicholas had looked at Liam was something she would never forget, like he was seeing his whole world and losing it all at once. And now, for the first time since the day she lied to him, the truth was out. The weight of it felt unbearable. She didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake staring at the ceiling while Liam slept beside her, one small hand curled against her shoulder. Her mind replayed every word, every expression, the way Nicholas's voice cracked when he said, "I want to know him." There was no denying the sincerity in his face. He hadn't shouted or accused her with rage, he had looked broken, betrayed, and quietly desperate. It would have been easier if he had stormed off or called her cruel. But he hadn't. He had stayed. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work and took Liam to the lake just outside of town. She needed space to think, to breathe, to look at her son and remind herself why she had done what she did. Liam threw stones into the water, laughing when they splashed, completely unaware that his entire world had just shifted. He didn't know his father had seen him. He didn't know that the man who had vanished before his birth now wanted to be a part of his life. Sarah watched him, her heart aching with love and fear. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that his father had been pushed away before he even had a chance? That evening, there was a knock at the door. She knew who it was before she even looked. Nicholas stood in the hallway, holding a paper bag with 2 coffees and a small box of pastries. He looked tired, but not angry. She stepped aside and let him in, not trusting her voice enough to speak. Liam was still asleep in the other room. Nicholas didn't sit down right away. He paced once, then turned to face her. "I need to understand," he said. "All of it. I deserve to know." So she told him. Every detail. She told him how his parents had summoned her after she found out she was pregnant, how they'd offered her money, how they'd called her unworthy, how they had painted him as someone who would resent her for ruining his life. She told him about the threats, how they had promised to destroy her future, to block her from jobs, from stability. She told him about the fear, the isolation, the humiliation of being treated like nothing more than a mistake. Nicholas sat in silence, his jaw clenched, his fists tight. She could see the storm in his eyes, the fury not directed at her, but at the people he had once trusted most. "They lied to both of us," he said quietly. "They stole from me. From him. From you." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I didn't want to believe they could be that cruel, but they were. And I let them scare me. I let them decide my life." Nicholas moved to the window and looked out at the small street below. "I hate that I believed you. That I didn't fight harder to understand why you'd say something like that." "You couldn't have known," she said. "I made it sound final. I wanted it to be clean." "It wasn't clean. It was hell," he replied, turning back to her. "I've spent 4 years wondering what I did wrong, why you would cut me out so completely. I hated myself for trusting you, and I hated you for not trusting me." "I hated myself too," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was the kind that came after wounds were exposed, raw, but healing. Nicholas took a deep breath. "I want to be part of Liam's life. Not just visits. I want to know him, love him, raise him. Even if you never forgive me, I'm not walking away again." Sarah watched him carefully. It won't be simple. He doesn't know who you are. He's never asked. He thinks dads are something other kids have, but it never made him sad. I don't want to make this harder for him, Nicholas said. But I won't pretend he's not mine. I lost too much time already. She hesitated, her hands clenched in her lap. If you're serious about this, you need to show him, not just tell me. You can't disappear. You can't get overwhelmed and run. I won't, he said firmly. I'm not the same man you left. And I'm not here to take him away from you. I'm here to earn a place in his world. Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was a start. For the first time in 4 years, she saw a version of the man she once loved standing in front of her, not the CEO, not the heir, not the obedient son, but the man who had laughed with her on beaches and kissed her forehead in silence and had once asked her what she'd name a son if she ever had one. She looked toward the hallway where Liam was sleeping. Then come back tomorrow, she said. Come for him. And we'll see where it goes. Nicholas nodded. I will. And as he walked out, something in her, something that had been buried under guilt and fear, began to breathe again. Nicholas returned the next day just after breakfast, dressed casually in jeans and a soft navy sweater, carrying a small bag with children's books and a toy dinosaur he'd nervously picked out from the local shop. Sarah opened the door slowly, unsure of how Liam would react. He didn't know who Nicholas was yet, but he was naturally open-hearted, endlessly curious, and often trusting in ways that only small children could be. She watched from a distance as Nicholas knelt to his level, carefully introducing himself with a warm but cautious smile. Hi, he said softly, holding the dinosaur out. I'm Nick. I brought this guy along because he heard there was a cool kid living here. Liam looked at him with wide blue eyes, almost mirroring Nicholas's own, and then reached for the toy. He clutched it with both hands and whispered a shy, "Thank you." Sarah exhaled slowly, tension easing from her shoulders just slightly. There was no instant recognition, no magical connection, but there was something gentle and natural in the way Liam warmed up to him in minutes. The two sat on the living room floor, flipping through the pages of a book about animals, Nicholas patiently listening to every fact Liam half-remembered and enthusiastically recited. Over the following weeks, Nicholas became a steady presence. He didn't just show up, he showed effort. He learned Liam's routines, what snacks he liked, what time he got tired, which songs he wanted to hear at bedtime, even though Sarah was still the one putting him to sleep. They took walks through the park together, and Nicholas pushed Liam on the swing until the little boy's laugh filled the air. They sat on benches with dripping popsicles, and Nicholas listened to Liam's 4-year-old thoughts on the moon, on dogs, on how superheroes probably got tired sometimes too. At first, Sarah stayed close during their time together, wary and protective, watching for signs of inconsistency or discomfort. But Nicholas never crossed a line. He didn't rush anything. He didn't ask Liam to call him Dad or even push for long one-on-one visits. He simply showed up and stayed. And slowly, Sarah began to let her guard down, even if she didn't say so out loud. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed, she and Nicholas sat across from each other in the dim kitchen. The air was thick with unspoken questions. She poured 2 mugs of tea, and they sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. "You're really trying," she said quietly, finally breaking the quiet. He looked at her, his expression serious but tired. "Because I missed 4 years. I can't fix that, but I'm not going to miss more." Sarah stared into her cup. You know, he didn't ask about a dad until recently. Not because he felt something missing, but because other kids started talking about theirs. I wasn't sure what to say. I told him every family is different, and he seemed okay with that. Nicholas's voice was thick with emotion. "I should have been there. If I had fought harder to understand why you said what you did, maybe." She cut him off gently. "It's not all your fault. You believed what I told you. I didn't give you a reason not to." "I believed it because I was afraid it might be true," he admitted. "Because I didn't think I deserved that kind of happiness. I thought it made more sense that I'd lose you." Sarah looked up, surprised. "You really thought that?" He nodded slowly. "My parents raised me to think love had to be practical. Clean. Strategic. What we had, it scared me. Because it was real." She leaned back, letting his words settle in her chest. "It was real," she said. "And terrifying." They both smiled faintly, the first shared moment of softness in years. The kind that didn't erase the past but acknowledged it. After that night, something shifted between them. Sarah began inviting him for dinner once a week. Nicholas started reading to Liam before bed. He learned how to braid the child's favorite blanket in a perfect roll for nap time. He celebrated Liam's small victories, like learning to tie his shoes, or writing his own name without flipping the letters. Liam, in turn, began to ask for Nicholas more. He would wait by the window when he knew he was coming, run to him at the door, and curl against him on the couch during cartoons. He didn't call him Dad, not yet, but Sarah noticed how his eyes lit up in ways she had never seen before. He felt safe. Seen. Loved. One night, while Sarah was putting Liam to bed, he asked sleepily, "Why does Nick come here so much now?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because he cares about you. A lot." "Is he going to stay forever?" Sarah's throat tightened. "Do you want him to?" Liam nodded, already half asleep. "I like it when he's here. It feels warm." And in that moment, Sarah felt her own heart open a little more. Maybe the past couldn't be rewritten. But maybe the future didn't have to carry the same weight. Maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about choosing what came next. Nicholas knew that rebuilding a relationship with Liam and Sarah was only one part of what he had to face. The deeper war was still ahead, against the people who had manipulated and silenced her, the very ones who had controlled every corner of his life since childhood. His parents had shaped him, molded him, and trained him to become the perfect heir, but now he saw with brutal clarity what their love had always been: conditional, calculating, and dangerous. He couldn't look at them the same anymore. And he knew the moment he stood up for Sarah and Liam, there would be no turning back. He scheduled a meeting with them at the family estate. No assistants. No business pretense. Just him, standing alone in the drawing room where generations of Hayes men had made decisions that built empires. His mother arrived first, elegantly composed as always, lips painted like armor. His father entered minutes later, radiating command with every step. Nicholas stood his ground, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. They offered polite greetings, clearly unaware of what was coming. But the moment Nicholas mentioned Sarah's name, his father's jaw tightened. His mother glanced toward the window, already withdrawing emotionally, as if she could pretend the conversation wasn't happening. Nicholas didn't let them deflect. He told them everything. That he had found Sarah again. That Liam was his son. That he had lost 4 years of fatherhood because of their lies. His voice stayed steady, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. He accused them not just of manipulation, but of cruelty, of robbing him of time, of love, of the most important relationship in his life. His father scoffed, saying he had done what was necessary to protect their name. That Sarah was a liability. That she had no status, no connections, no future worth investing in. His mother's voice followed, icy and elegant, claiming that Nicholas's judgment had always been clouded by emotion, and that eventually he would thank them. But he didn't thank them. He stood taller and told them they were wrong. That Sarah had more strength, integrity, and loyalty in her than anyone in their social circle ever had. That Liam was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and that the only thing he regretted was not walking away from them sooner. His father threatened legal action, tried to remind him of financial obligations and inheritance clauses, but Nicholas cut him off coldly. He no longer cared. He was prepared to give up every cent, every share of stock, every seat on every board if that's what it took. His life wasn't for sale. His son wasn't a mistake. And he wouldn't sacrifice real love for polished appearances ever again. By the time the conversation ended, the silence between them was permanent. His parents didn't follow him out. They didn't ask him to reconsider. They just stood there, rooted in a world he no longer belonged to. The next few days were messy. Lawyers called. Accounts were frozen. Business partners whispered. But Nicholas moved forward anyway. He sold off shares of the company he had helped build. He announced his exit from the board and started plans for his own venture, a small but ambitious tech startup with a mission rooted in transparency and accessibility, not elitism and control. He didn't know if it would succeed, but he knew it would be honest. And it would be his. Meanwhile, back in Fairhill, Sarah watched all of this unfold with a mix of awe and fear. She hadn't asked him to do it. She hadn't expected him to walk away from everything. But as he showed up to dinner again and again, exhausted but present, bruised but determined, she began to understand the depth of his choice. He wasn't just trying to play house. He was fighting for a life that no one had ever given him permission to have before. One night, after Liam had fallen asleep on the couch with a book resting on his chest, Nicholas sat beside Sarah, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. "I think I finally understand what it means to fight for something," he said. "Not for profit. Not for pride. But because it's right." Sarah reached over and took his hand. It was the first time she'd done so in years. "And now you have something worth fighting for." He didn't speak. He just held her hand tightly, grateful, humbled, and finally, truly, free. The morning sun filtered gently through the pale curtains in Sarah's kitchen, casting a soft glow over the modest space where so much of her life had played out: meals, laughter, exhaustion, silent tears. The past few months had brought change she never could have imagined, and though she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Liam, she felt the shift in every breath. Nicholas had become a part of their daily rhythm, no longer a surprise visitor or tentative presence, but someone who showed up consistently, with muddy sneakers, messy hair from chasing Liam in the park, and eyes that no longer held the sharp edges of a corporate executive but rather the quiet warmth of a man reclaiming his soul. Sarah noticed it more each day: the way Nicholas anticipated what Liam needed before he asked, the way he asked Sarah what she needed even when she brushed it off, the way he paid attention to the little things: how Liam hated the crust on toast, how Sarah never drank her coffee hot, how they both lit up when they danced together in the living room without music. It was in these details that she realized how deeply Nicholas was rebuilding not just his life, but hers too. But even as her guard slowly began to lower, she still wrestled with fear. It was one thing to fall in love with Nicholas Hayes once, when she was younger, more naive, believing that love could shield her from the world. It was another thing entirely to risk her heart again now that she had Liam, now that she had so much more to lose. She didn't doubt his intentions, but her instinct to protect her son remained fierce. She needed to be sure that if she opened the door completely, it would stay open. Nicholas seemed to understand this without needing to be told. He never pressured her. Instead, he found quiet ways to prove himself. He fixed the broken kitchen drawer without being asked, took Liam to the doctor when he had a fever, stayed up late helping Sarah prepare materials for her new job at the clinic. When Sarah's car wouldn't start, he showed up before sunrise with jumper cables and coffee. Not to impress her, not to earn points, but because he was there now, in every way that counted. One evening, after a long day of work in preschool and errands, they all sat on the worn living room couch, Liam nestled between them with a blanket pulled up to his chin. He had fallen asleep halfway through a story, and Sarah found herself watching Nicholas as he gently brushed Liam's hair back from his forehead. There was something so unguarded in his expression, something that made her chest tighten. She hadn't planned to say anything, but the words escaped her before she could stop them. "You're a good father." Nicholas didn't look at her right away. He continued watching Liam sleep, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to be. I still feel like I've missed so much." "You can't get those years back," she said softly. "But you can have the rest." He turned to her then, and their eyes met in the dim light. "Is that something I'm allowed to hope for?" She hesitated, not out of doubt but because she knew what this moment meant. She had held on to her walls for so long, convinced that letting them down would only bring pain. But the man sitting next to her wasn't the same man she had once feared losing. He had fought for them. Chosen them. Changed for them. "You don't have to hope," she said, her voice trembling. "You're already part of it." Nicholas reached for her hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Their fingers intertwined with ease, as though they'd never been apart. The silence between them was no longer filled with regret, but with possibility. A few days later, they took Liam on his first real trip out of town, nothing extravagant, just a quiet weekend near the coast, where the waves lapped gently against the sand and the sky stretched endlessly overhead. Sarah hadn't been back to the beach since the last time they were together, back when the world had still felt full of promise and everything had gone wrong. But this time, it was different. Liam shrieked with delight as he chased seagulls and built lopsided castles, and Nicholas ran beside him, laughing so openly Sarah barely recognized the man he used to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon and they sat together wrapped in towels, Nicholas wrapped his arms around them both, and Sarah leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. That night, as they tucked Liam into bed in the little rental cottage, Nicholas lingered at the doorway, watching him sleep. Sarah came up behind him and whispered, "He feels whole now." Nicholas nodded, his voice thick. "So do I." Later, as they stood outside under the stars, barefoot on the deck, Nicholas turned to her, eyes searching. "I don't need you to answer anything tonight," he said quietly. "But I need you to know this isn't temporary. I want a life with you. With both of you. Whatever that looks like, however long it takes." Sarah looked up at him, the sea breeze tangling her hair. "I don't have an answer," she said truthfully. "Not yet. But I believe you." That was enough. For now. They didn't need grand declarations or perfect timing. They just needed each other. And for the first time in years, they both believed in something that had once seemed lost forever, a future, messy, uncertain, beautiful, that was entirely theirs to build. Autumn arrived in Fairhill in a slow, golden hush. Leaves burned into shades of amber and rust, and the air took on that crispness that made morning walks feel like a promise. Life for Sarah, Nicholas, and Liam had settled into something almost ordinary, though it felt anything but. It was the kind of ordinary Sarah had once only imagined: shared breakfasts, backpacks packed together by the door, laughter echoing from the living room, and the soft hum of music while dinner simmered on the stove. It was the quiet rhythm of a family rediscovering each other, building a new world piece by piece. Nicholas had moved into a small house just a few streets away from Sarah's apartment. He didn't ask to move in with her right away. He understood that trust wasn't rebuilt in declarations but in consistency. Still, he was there most mornings, helping Liam find his socks or carrying an extra thermos of coffee for Sarah as she wrangled with emails and clinic schedules. On weekends, they explored nearby trails, baked muffins that rarely turned out right, and played board games that ended in tickle fights and exaggerated arguments over rules Liam made up as he went along. Liam had grown comfortable with Nicholas, so comfortable that Sarah sometimes caught him slipping and calling him Dad without thinking. The first time it happened, Nicholas froze, his eyes filling almost instantly, but he didn't say anything. He simply knelt down, hugged Liam tightly, and whispered something that Sarah couldn't hear but felt in her bones. It wasn't forced. It wasn't coached. It was love, finding its place naturally. But not everything came easily. Nicholas still bore the scars of the past, days when doubts crept in, when business pressures mounted from his new startup, when the reality of having chosen a completely different path weighed heavy on his shoulders. He missed some of the power and certainty he once had, but he never said so aloud. Sarah saw it in the quiet way he sometimes looked out the window, or in the deep sighs he let out late at night. She didn't try to fix it. She knew he had made his choice for the right reasons, but even the right choices could come with grief. They were honest with each other now, painfully so sometimes. When Sarah had hard days, when the memories of being dismissed and humiliated by his family rose again, she told him. When Nicholas struggled with the guilt of having left her alone for so long, he told her too. And together, they sat in that truth, not to relive the past, but to understand it, to make sure it never repeated itself. One evening in early November, they planned a small gathering at Nicholas's house. Just a few close friends from the clinic, neighbors who'd become part of their daily life, and one or two of Nicholas's former colleagues who had stood by him after the fallout. It wasn't a formal event, just dinner and laughter, Liam running barefoot between adults, his cheeks flushed from excitement and too many cookies. As Sarah watched Nicholas talking with guests in the kitchen, Liam tugged on her sleeve. "Mama," he said, holding a crayon drawing, "can we give this to Daddy?" The word hit her gently now. It no longer brought tension or fear. She nodded and followed Liam as he proudly handed over the paper, a wobbly drawing of 3 stick figures standing under a bright yellow sun. Nicholas took it like it was a priceless artifact. He knelt, pulled Liam into a hug, and looked up at Sarah. "I want us to frame this," he said. Later that night, after everyone had left and Liam had fallen asleep with crayon smudges still on his hands, Sarah found Nicholas on the back porch. He was wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, staring at the stars like he used to when they were young and unsure and full of dreams they hadn't yet learned to protect. She sat beside him, and for a while, they didn't speak. Then Nicholas turned, his voice quiet but steady. "I want to marry you. Not because it's the next step or because I think we need it to be real. But because when I look at you, when I look at Liam, I see the only home I've ever wanted." Sarah didn't answer right away. She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his, and said, "Ask me again in the morning. When the coffee's brewing and Liam's building a fort out of our clean laundry." Nicholas laughed, the sound low and full, and nodded. "All right. But just so you know, I'm going to keep asking. Every day, until the answer's yes." The next morning, with sunlight pouring across the kitchen floor, Liam building a spaceship out of couch cushions and wooden spoons, and Nicholas pouring 2 mugs of coffee with a sleepy smile, Sarah looked at him and whispered, "Yes." There was no need for a ring yet. No fanfare. Just the soft click of a mug against the counter, and the beginning of the rest of their life, grounded not in fantasy or perfection, but in hard-won love, in truth, in choosing each other every single day. This story's ending is a rare kind of full circle, one that doesn't erase the pain of the past but transforms it into something stronger. What makes it powerful isn't just that love returns, it's how it returns, scarred, humbled, rebuilt with honesty and persistence. Nicholas and Sarah don't get a fairy tale, they earn their way back to each other, moment by moment, by choosing love after betrayal, trust after silence, and hope after years of loss. The final scenes don't offer perfection, and that's exactly what makes them satisfying. Life didn't go as planned for either of them, and yet, what they created in the aftermath, a family built not on illusion, but on truth, is far more meaningful. Their happy ending is not in the grand gestures but in the quiet mornings, the unspoken forgiveness, the child's laughter that bridges what was broken. To me, it's a story about redemption, but more importantly, about courage, the courage to face what hurt, to admit what was wrong, and to still believe that love is worth coming back to.